plagiarism, if such a term can be used about a personal letter. And by the time Annie came to understand that it meant the stealing of someone else's words or ideas, she lacked the courage to back down. Miss Canby wrote to Helen and Annie. Her letters were wise, generous, and
affectionate. Samuel Clemens was actually Mark Twain.
Samuel Clemens writing as Mark Twain. Is that
Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn? You just read that?
I thought it was like
No, he's a writer.
Queens.
No.
Writing as Mark Twain had this to say 10 years later when he came to know Helen. Oh dear me, how unspeakably funny and owlishly
Idiotic.
and
Grotesque.
grotesque was that plagiarism, any human utterance, oral or written, except plagiarism. As for Agnes, to Helen and Annie, both tried to remain the loving friend he had always been. In time, his attitude would change, but that was later. For now, it seemed that Perkins had been
Dealt
a near mortal blow and survived. Everybody went on more or less as before. At the end of May, Annie and Helen traveled south to Ivy Green and a summer of misery. They found the captain so heavily in debt that he borrowed that he borrowed $35
familiar with that one.
from Annie. Everything the Kellers owned was mortgaged. Meanwhile, Helen was pale, listless, preoccupied with her own
anxieties.
There were hours when she sat quiet still, not speaking, taking no interest in anything, not even her books. Something was wrong with her world. It used to be full of people who loved her President Cleveland, the great inventor Dr. Bell, the teachers at Perkins. All of them had loved her once, and she had loved everyone in the world. Sleepless, tormented by the heat of a southern summer, she was ill off on for weeks at a time. Suppose she never got better. Once she trapped into Annie's hand her fears that she might die in this uncertain new world. The affair of the Frost King left such a bitter aftertaste that when Helen wrote about it years later, she said, "Joy deserted my heart, and for a long time I lived in doubt, anxiety, and fear. The thought of those dreadful days chills my heart." But then the weather changed. The air turned crisp on it. Although the thought that what I wrote might not be absolutely my own tormented me. As she recalled, sometimes in the midst of a paragraph I was writing, I said to myself, suppose it should be found that all this was written by someone long ago. I wrote timidly, fearfully, but resolutely. Bit by bit, the pieces were assembled
That's right.
into a whole and read to Annie, who was very much moved by them. And in mid-December, Helen mailed off a completed manuscript. The editor was so delighted that he sent Helen a check for $100. This was followed in January by a New Year's present of $50 from the same editor who published the article in January 1894. A
Philanthropist?
A philanthropist in Philadelphia sent money. John
Spalding.
Another rich
Benefactor.
gave Helen 15 shares of stock from a trust he had founded. Yet
Yes, you're not filming that, I hope.
spoiled by her father's interference.
Father's interference? Well, there's a good point, dear. We should really take note of that one.
He took charge of the stock, the money gifts, even the check for the article, which she had hoped to use to start a lending library in Tuscumbia. Now the money for such a project was out of her hands. There was no talk of their going back to Perkins, although Agnes wrote to Annie. The winter wore on, a restless one without direction and without much in the way of education. They had a lesson now and then, but nothing seemed to lead anywhere, and nothing mattered very much. Then unexpectedly
That's right.
a reprieve came, one that promised excitement and a change of scene. Captain Keller decided to go to Washington in March, bringing Helen, Annie, and Mildred. They would be... Who's Mildred?
I don't remember.
They would be present at the second
inauguration
of President Cleveland. They would go on to Boston and after that to Chicago for the World's Fair of 1893. Helen was beside herself with joy, and Annie began to hope that Agnes would meet them in Washington, that they would be friends again. He never came to Washington when Helen and Annie arrived in Boston. They saw that the friendship with Agnes was over. It was after 1893, Helen wrote some years later, after we had ceased to avail ourselves of the hospitality of the Perkins Institute. That Mr. Agnes proved untrue to the friendship between us. It was then that he declared that and continued to declare to one person and another his opinion that we were one or both guilty. Once at the kindergarten for the blind, in the presence of several friends, one of whom reported the matter direct to us. He said, "Helen Keller is a living lie." By this he meant, as he explained to the friend, that Annie had taught Helen to deceive. That was the wrong Mr. Agnes did, my teacher. Helen's letter continues. That was the untruth he told of me. It was a sad end to the sad story of the Frost King, and it was not the last time Annie's temperament, her high-handedness, her inability to admit a mistake would dispute lives and friendships. They turned increasingly to Helen's first friend, Alexander Graham Bell. He became the guide and protector Agnes used to be, but a far wiser and more experienced one. Helen had loved him from the first moment they met, and he loved her in return, both for herself and for a quality in her that touched him to the depths. I feel that in this child I have seen more of the divine, he once said, than has been manifest in anyone I ever met before. He had two daughters, Elise and Daisy, who were about the same age as Helen. They too became her friends and admirers. But there were times when all three were in their teens that the daughters felt twinges of jealousy because of their father's devotion to Helen. After Boston and what Helen remembered as a thrilling detour to Niagara Falls, they went on to Chicago, where they were joined by Dr. Bell. In Jackson Park faced Lake Michigan, the fairgrounds sprawled over 686 acres and cost $28 million. More than 20 million visitors came to see it. Helen Keller, an eager animation 13-year-old, attracted attention wherever she went. A photo taken at this time shows her in profile. Her head covered with short curls, her neck long and graceful. Everything about her almost painfully lovely. Helen Keller, age 7, picture with a dog. See?
That's cute.
The next one is Helen reading at the Perkins Institute later known as the Perkins School for the Blind.
Show us a picture of Helen Keller.
And this one is Helen with Michael Agnes, the director of the Perkins Institute. And this one is Helen graduated from Radcliffe on her 24th birthday. 24th? I was 24 when she graduated.
Well, you have to think of how she started, though. It took her a while to learn everything. She was, 10, I guess, before she was actually taught how to communicate.
See,
It's very pretty.
she is.
Mm-hmm. Very pretty. It's hard to tell in those old pictures. They don't dress them up. It's very nice features.
This one is here, Helen Keller, Annie Sullivan, and Alexander Graham Bell simultaneously use 3 modes of communication. Helen reads Annie's lips. Annie and Dr. Bell talk, and Dr. Bell fingers spells into Helen's hand. What's AFB stand for?
Maybe the